The voice on the phone was cheerful. Too cheerful for someone speaking to a woman who had just woken up with anesthesia still clinging to her bones like fog. "Miss Whitford," the man said warmly, as if the name belonged to someone alive and current, not buried beneath decades of marriage, loss, and quiet survival. "We're pleased to confirm the sale of your wedding rings. Truly exquisite pieces." The buyer was thrilled. For a moment I didn't breathe. The ceiling above me blurred slightly. My fingers tightened around the edge of the kitchen counter. Not from weakness but from disbelief. Whitford. A name I hadn't answered to in 52 years. A name that belonged to a girl who still believed permanence was guaranteed and betrayal was something that happened to other people. "I think you have the wrong number," I said slowly, testing my voice as if it didn't belong to me yet. He laughed lightly. "No mistake at all, Miss Whitford. We have your paperwork right here." Identification matched perfectly. Cold spread through my chest. Not sharp, not sudden, but deliberate. Like a door being closed gently behind me while I wasn't looking. "My rings?" I asked. "Yes, ma'am. The gold band and the engagement ring. The modest diamond, quite sentimental actually." My throat tightened. Those rings hadn't left my dresser since the morning my husband died. He'd taken them off carefully, set them inside the velvet box, kissed my forehead, and never came back from the hospital. I hadn't worn them again, but I'd touched them every morning. Proof that a life had existed. Proof that love didn't vanish just because someone stopped breathing. "I didn't authorize any sale," I said. There was a pause. Papers rustled. "Well," he replied pleasantly, "we have your signature. And your documents. Everything checks out. Signature. Documents." The words echoed louder than the ticking clock behind me. I could hear it slicing through the silence, each second a reminder that time was still moving, even though something essential had just shifted. "I was in surgery," I said. "I was sedated." Another pause. This one thinner. "If there's been an error, we'll investigate," he said. "But based on what we received, everything appears valid." When the call ended, I stood very still. Not panicked. Not crying. Just aware. The kind of awareness you get when you realize someone has walked through your home while you slept, touched your things, learned your habits, closed the door quietly behind them. I walked to the bedroom on unsteady legs. The velvet box was still there, exactly where it had always been. I lifted it. The weight was wrong. Empty. Someone had opened it, taken what they wanted, closed it neatly again. My hands trembled, not from age but from clarity. Only a few people had keys to my house while I was in the hospital. Only a few people knew where I kept my old documents. Only a few people knew I wouldn't be awake enough to object. I sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty box, feeling something unfamiliar stir in my chest. Not grief. Not fear. Recognition. Whoever did this thought I wouldn't notice. Thought I would accept it. Thought I would stay quiet. They were wrong. But the real question, the one that refused to leave me, was this. If they were bold enough to take my rings, what else had they already taken while I wasn't looking? The house looked the same. That was the unsettling part. The crocheted throw was still folded over the arm of the chair the way I liked it. The framed photographs on the mantel still smiled back at me. My husband younger than I ever remembered him. Our faces pressed close together in a way that suggested we believed time was generous. His old pipe still rested on the bookshelf, untouched for years but never moved. Everything was exactly where it had been. And yet the air felt disturbed, as if someone had walked through my life and left no fingerprints, only absence. I stood in the doorway longer than necessary, listening. The refrigerator hummed softly. A car passed outside. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked and then stopped. The world continued without hesitation, unaware that mine had been quietly rearranged. I moved toward the desk by the window, the one I used only for things that mattered. I hadn't opened it since before the surgery. I knew what should be where. My hands remembered the order even if my eyes hadn't seen it in weeks. The bottom drawer slid open with a familiar creak. The envelope containing my old documents, birth certificate, maiden name identification, things I kept out of habit more than need, was supposed to be buried beneath tax folders. Instead, it lay on top, slightly crooked, as if someone had returned it in a hurry. My fingertips hovered above the paper before touching it, And when I did, a faint tremor passed through me. Someone had been careful, but not careful enough. The drawer hadn't been rummaged through wildly. It had been searched with purpose. I opened the envelope. My old driver's license was gone. So was one notarized name change document from decades ago. I closed my eyes, not in disbelief but in calculation. Whoever did this didn't panic. They knew exactly what they needed and exactly where to find it. That kind of confidence doesn't belong to strangers. It belongs to people who know your routines. People who know when you'll be weak. I walked to the bedroom again, this time opening every drawer. The top one first. Then the second. Then the far back corner where I once kept jewelry I didn't wear anymore. Gone. The silver bracelet my husband gave me on our 25th anniversary. My mother's locket. Only the cheap costume pieces remained, the kind no one would bother trying to sell. I sat down slowly, my heart beating louder than the quiet deserved. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't confusion. This was inventory. Outside, a car slowed near my house. My breath caught instinctively. For half a second, I expected to hear the familiar uneven rumble of an engine I knew too well. But the car passed and the moment slipped away. Still the thought stayed. I went to the kitchen, filled the kettle, and set it on the stove more for grounding than for tea. While it heated, I opened the drawer beside the refrigerator and pulled out an old brown notebook. My husband used to tease me about it. "You write everything down like a detective," he'd say. Maybe that habit had saved me. I flipped back to the week of my surgery. My handwriting was shakier there. "Ruth has keys," I'd written. "Says she'll water the plants." I glanced toward the living room. The philodendron's leaves were dry, curling at the edges. The kettle began to hiss. I turned it off without pouring. Someone remembered the keys, but forgot the plants. That detail settled into me like a final piece sliding into place. When the front door finally opened later that afternoon, I didn't jump. I didn't rush. I stood still in the living room as the spare key scraped softly in the lock. And when she walked in without knocking, confident, familiar, unbothered, I already knew this conversation would change everything. But what I didn't yet know was how far the betrayal truly reached, or how many names were about to surface before the truth did. And the question that followed me into that moment was simple and terrifying. If she wasn't alone, who else had helped her erase me while I was still breathing? She didn't knock. She never did anymore. The door closed behind her with the same practiced motion she'd used for years, as if my house were an extension of her own life. Another room she had the right to enter, rearrange, and leave without asking permission. "Oh good," she said brightly. "You're up." Her voice was light, casual, almost relieved. Not relieved that I was recovering, but relieved that I was conscious enough to play the part she expected. "You look pale," she added, setting her purse down. "I thought you'd still be resting." She leaned in as if to kiss my cheek, but stopped halfway, distracted by something behind me. Her eyes flicked past my face, scanning the room, checking, counting. That was the first thing that hurt. Not the missing rings. Not the stolen documents. The way she wouldn't look at me when she asked how I was. "I lost something," I said quietly. She froze, not dramatically, just a fraction of a second too long. Then she smiled again, smaller this time. "Well, after anesthesia, that's normal," she replied. "Your mind's still foggy. My wedding rings are gone." The words landed between us with weight. Solid. Unavoidable. She walked past me into the kitchen, opening cabinets that had never held jewelry, peering into drawers as though she might magically discover gold bands next to the tea bags. "I'm sure they'll turn up," she murmured. "You always put things in strange places." "Stop." The word came out steadier than I expected. She turned slowly, irritation flashing before she smoothed it away. "They were sold," I said. "An auction house called me. They thanked me." Her jaw tightened, just enough to notice if you knew her well. "Oh, Eleanor," she sighed. "You're confusing things. They called me by my maiden name." That did it. Her eyes met mine for the first time since she'd entered the house. Hard. Assessing. "They had my old documents," I continued. "The ones kept in my desk. They had a signature I didn't give." Silence thickened the kitchen. She crossed her arms, defensive now. "You've just had surgery," she said sharply. "You're not yourself." I'm more myself than I've been in years. She laughed once, short, humorless. Honestly, you're being paranoid. Someone has to make decisions when you're vulnerable. I asked you to water my plants. Her mouth opened, then closed again. And you didn't even do that. A flush crept up her neck. Is this really about plants? No, I said. It's about someone walking through my house while I was unconscious. Opening drawers. Taking things that don't belong to them. She shook her head, pacing now. If you think I stole from you, you're out of your mind. You had keys. So what? You had access. So did the nurses. The hospital. Anyone. But only one person knew where my documents were kept. Her breathing changed. Not louder. Quicker. You should be grateful, she snapped. I put my life on hold for you. You weren't helping me, I said softly. You were helping yourself. The slap of truth echoed louder than shouting ever could. She grabbed her purse, snapping it shut. I don't have to stand here and be accused, she said, heading for the door. You need rest. You're imagining things. Then why are you nervous? I asked. She didn't answer. The door shut hard enough to rattle the frames on the wall. I didn't feel small afterward. I felt awake. And as the quiet settled around me, one thing became terrifyingly clear. If she thought I'd let this go, she had never truly known me at all. But the next morning would reveal something even worse. Because the hospital, the one place meant to protect me, had helped them do it. I didn't sleep. Not the way people mean when they say they slept badly. I lay in bed with my eyes closed, listening to the house breathe around me, every creak sounding louder than it should have. When morning finally arrived, it didn't feel like rest had been stolen from me. It felt like something else had taken its place. Something alert, tight, unwilling to drift back into ignorance. I wrapped my robe around myself and sat at the kitchen table before the sun was fully up. The hospital paperwork lay spread out in front of me like a quiet accusation. I hadn't looked closely at it before. I hadn't wanted to. There's a kind of trust we place in institutions, the belief that someone somewhere is paying attention, that they wouldn't let something wrong slip through so easily. Halfway down the discharge form, I saw it. My signature. Or what was supposed to be mine. It leaned too far to the right. The loop on the E was wide, clumsy. The pressure uneven. My handwriting has softened with age, but it has rhythm. This had none. It looked like someone had guided a hand that didn't belong to them. Because they had. I stared at it for a long time, feeling something harden inside me. Holding a pen is not consent. Being conscious is not the same as understanding. I picked up the phone and dialed the hospital. The automated voice felt distant, impersonal, but when a receptionist finally answered, her tone softened when I gave my name. Mrs. Hartwell, she said kindly. How can I help you? I took a breath. I need to know who submitted the paperwork I signed after surgery, and who provided the identification documents used on my behalf. There was a pause. Keys clicked softly. One moment. I waited, counting my breaths, grounding myself in the feel of the table beneath my hands. It shows your medical proxy provided the documents, she said. Alora Kenton. The name settled into the room like smoke. My niece. Not my caregiver. Not my daughter. Someone who had never handled my affairs. Until suddenly she had. Did she bring them herself? I asked. Yes. She submitted them at your bedside. My throat tightened. I was sedated. Well, the receptionist replied gently, you weren't fully unconscious. The nurse guided your hand to sign. Guided your hand. The phrase echoed like a quiet cruelty. Could you send me copies of everything she submitted? I asked. Every document. Of course. When I hung up, the house felt colder. Not physically, emotionally. Because now I knew this wasn't one person acting alone. This was layered, planned, shared. Before I could sit with that realization, the doorbell rang. I flinched despite myself. It was the mailman holding a padded envelope marked urgent. I signed for it and closed the door, my hands already unsteady. Inside were copies from the auction house, the consignment agreement, my old driver's license, and a grainy security photo of the person who delivered the jewelry. I unfolded each page slowly. The signature was careful. Too careful. Someone had practiced. Then I looked at the photo. The face was partially obscured. A mask. But posture doesn't lie. The slope of the shoulder. The way the chin lifted slightly, as if challenging the world to question her. I knew that stance. My phone buzzed. Laura's name flashed on the screen. I answered on the second ring. "Aunt Eleanor," she said sweetly. "I heard you were confused yesterday." "Confused?" "No," I replied calmly. "I'm very clear." The silence on the other end stretched thin. And in that pause I realized something that changed everything. They hadn't just taken my rings. They had tested how invisible they believed I was. And now that I was pushing back, they were starting to panic. I let Laura talk. That was the mistake she didn't realize she was making. Her voice stayed light, syrupy, wrapped in concern that felt rehearsed. "Mom's worried about you," she said. "After anesthesia, older patients sometimes imagine things. It's common. Older patients. As if age dissolves memory. As if years soften truth instead of sharpening it. I have copies of the documents you submitted," I said quietly. The silence on the line was no longer polite. "I'm not sure what you mean," she replied, but her words arrived half a second too late, like someone scrambling to find the right script. "You brought my old identification to the hospital," I continued. "You stood at my bedside while I was sedated. You let a nurse guide my hand. A shallow breath. I could hear it. I was helping," she said quickly. "They said someone had to. You weren't fully awake. No one had to sell my rings." That was when the line truly went quiet. I could almost see her face tightening, the way it did when things slipped out of her control. Laura had always been good at order, at managing details, at convincing people she was capable. But capability without conscience is just theft dressed nicely. "I don't know anything about a sale," she said at last. "Someone used my maiden name," I replied. "Someone brought the rings in person. Someone prepared signatures." Her tone sharpened. "Are you accusing me?" "I'm asking you." Another pause. Then a brittle laugh. "This is ridiculous. You're upset. You should rest before you ruin relationships." I ended the call without saying goodbye. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from something long overdue finally rising to the surface. They hadn't expected resistance. They'd expected gratitude. I drove to the auction house that afternoon. The building was all glass and polished brass, too clean for what it held inside. A young man greeted me with a practiced smile and led me to a small office where a folder already waited on the desk. "We understand you believe there may have been a mistake," he said. "There was deception," I corrected. I studied the paperwork again. The signature. The identification. The careful effort to make it all look legitimate. "That signature isn't mine," I said. He swallowed. "If that's true, we take this very seriously." "It is." I asked about the footage. He hesitated, then left to get his manager. She was calm, professional, but her eyes held concern. "The rings haven't shipped yet," she said. "We can reverse the sale pending investigation." Relief passed through me, but not triumph, because getting something back doesn't erase the fact it was taken. "The seller said you were overwhelmed after surgery," she added. "That she was sparing you stress." The words landed like ice. Someone had spoken for me, decided for me, framed betrayal as kindness. When I left, my phone buzzed. A bank notification. Unauthorized access attempt blocked. The timestamp was minutes old. They were moving faster now, panicking, because they finally understood something they should have realized sooner. I wasn't confused. I wasn't weak. I was awake. And the closer I got to the truth, the more desperate they were becoming. But desperation always leaves footprints, and I was about to follow them straight to the source. The bank was quiet in the way money always is, hushed, polished, indifferent. I sat in the waiting area watching people half my age tap impatient fingers against their phones, their lives moving at speeds I no longer rushed to match. When my number was called, I stood slowly, deliberately, and followed the young man behind the counter to a desk tucked against the wall. "How can I help you today, Mrs. Hartwell?" he asked, already typing. "I need a full review of my recent account activity," I said. "Especially the week I was hospitalized." His fingers paused, then resumed slower this time. "There were several withdrawals," he said carefully. Small amounts. Nothing that would normally trigger an alert. Small. Strategic. The kind of theft designed to hide inside familiarity. Who authorized them? I asked. He hesitated again. They were processed under temporary secondary access. Entered the day before your procedure. By whom? He checked the screen. Alora Kenton. The name no longer shocked me. It settled instead. Heavy but expected. Like a stone dropped exactly where I knew it would land. Freeze all third-party access immediately, I said. He nodded, typing quickly. Would you like alerts for any attempted access? Yes, I replied. Every single one. As he finalized the changes, my phone buzzed again. Another blocked attempt. They had felt the door close. And they were rattling the handle. I left the bank without looking back. The air outside sharper than before. Truth does that. It strips away softness, replaces it with clarity. I didn't feel angry anymore. Anger burns too fast. What I felt was steadier. Prepared. When I pulled into my driveway, I sat in the car for a moment, breathing. The house looked ordinary from the outside. White trim. Familiar windows. But I knew better now. Ordinary things are the easiest places to hide betrayal. That evening, the doorbell rang. I wasn't expecting him. Reed stood on the porch, hands shoved deep into his jacket pockets, his expression tight with something between guilt and resolve. Aunt Eleanor, he said softly. Can I come in? He didn't sit comfortably. His eyes kept flicking to the folders on the table, the ring box resting openly beside them. They've been talking, he said. My mom and grandma. They thought I was upstairs. I stayed quiet. They said you wouldn't notice the small stuff, he continued. That you don't check your accounts. That the rings weren't worth much anyway. The words cut deeper than any theft. Grandma said it was better to handle things now, he added, voice cracking. Before something happened. Something had happened. Just not to me. I reached across the table and placed my hand over his. You did the right thing, I said. His shoulders sagged with relief. After he left, the house felt different. Not emptier, but cleaner. As if truth had opened a window and let stale air escape. I knew what came next. They wouldn't stop. People who believe they're entitled don't retreat quietly. And sure enough, as night settled in, I heard the familiar sound of an uneven engine pulling into the driveway. The spare key scraped against the lock. Ruth was back. And this time she wasn't coming to pretend. She was coming because she knew the ground beneath her was starting to crack. And she was running out of places to stand. Ruth didn't wait for permission. She never had. The door swung open with the same authority she'd carried all her life, coat still on, purse clutched like armor. Her eyes moved quickly, too quickly, taking in the folders on the table, the ring box in plain sight, the way I stood instead of sat. She stopped just inside the doorway. What are you doing? She demanded. Calling banks. Talking to lawyers. Making a mess of things that didn't need to be touched. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. I'm reclaiming my life, I said. She scoffed, dropping her purse onto the chair. Don't be dramatic. You're blowing this out of proportion. My wedding rings were sold while I was unconscious, I replied. My accounts were accessed. My documents were taken. She waved a dismissive hand. Those rings weren't worth anything. That was the moment something finally broke open. They were worth me, I said. And you knew that. Her jaw tightened. The anger came fast now, unfiltered. You're getting old, Eleanor. Things slip. Someone had to step in. I didn't ask you to step in, I said. I asked you to respect me. She moved closer, lowering her voice as if control might still be negotiated. Drop this. If you keep pushing, things will get ugly. They already are, I answered. You just didn't expect to be seen. For a long moment she said nothing. And in that silence, the truth did what it always does, it rose. Her shoulders sagged slightly. Just enough. Not remorse. Fear. You don't know everything, she murmured. Then tell me, I said. She didn't. She looked away, rubbing her temples, trapped between excuses that no longer worked. When she finally turned back, her eyes held something hollow. You shouldn't live alone anymore, she said quietly. You shouldn't manage things. That was her confession. Not spoken plainly, but unmistakable. I managed my life just fine, I said. What you managed was your access to it. She stood abruptly. You're making a mistake. I'm making a boundary. She left without another word. I locked the door behind her. Slowly, deliberately. The sound of the deadbolt sliding home felt like a promise kept to myself. That night, I sat at the dining table with a blank notepad. For years, I'd assumed things would naturally go to family. That proximity meant loyalty. That blood meant safety. I was wrong. I thought of Reed. Of how he came with nothing to gain and everything to risk. Of how truth mattered more to him than comfort. I wrote his name. Just one. The phone buzzed beside me. A message from my lawyer. Hospital access logs confirmed. Proxy misuse verified. Confirmed. I closed my eyes and breathed deeply, not in relief but in alignment. Everything had finally clicked into place. The opening hook, the name, the rings, the quiet theft. It all made sense now. They hadn't just taken jewelry. They had tried to erase my autonomy while I was still breathing. And they failed. Because age doesn't make you invisible. Silence doesn't mean consent. And kindness should never be mistaken for weakness. I placed the rings back into their velvet box and closed it. Not as an ending, but as a reclaiming. If you're listening to this and you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or quietly taken advantage of, remember this. Your voice doesn't expire with age. Your worth doesn't belong to anyone else. And it is never too late to stand up and say, "This is mine." If this story moved you, share it. Someone else might need to wake up sooner than I did.